So, because on the request of certain absent people, the SHIUR is going to be taped digitally, and we are going to see if maybe, if things work out, we can toss it on the web. But here is the plan. First of all, if people object to it, we can stop the tape. And second of all, if people don't want to be recorded, I can pause it.
I'm a blurterer. I can't tell you when I'm going to say something.
That is fine. We will preserve the record of the blurs. It'll be great. So seriously, if anybody wants to say something and they don't want it to be on the tape, you can just raise your hand and point, and I'm happy to pause the tape.
You're going to be recorded, just to know.
Okay.
So we have another one here.
All right. So, class 2 on the Megillah. Last class we raised a couple of dozen questions about what is going on in this book. We are trying to figure out what is going on in this sefer. And so this week we are going to be focusing on the political aspects of the Megillah. And we're going to be taking two different approaches. The approach of Rav H. Shalom and the approach of Rabbi Foreman, right? David Foreman. And one of them, Rabbi H. Shalom's approach, is more on the pure realpolitik side, and Rabbi Foreman introduces more of a psychological, emotional component. But we will go through each in turn. But just as a word of caution, I would just want everybody to know that each one of these approaches are based on very extremely well-researched, thorough, nuanced approaches. Each one, I think, Rabbi Shalom has 6 or 8 hours worth of lectures, and I think Rabbi Foreman has an excellent book on the subject, also has 6 or 8 hours worth of Divrei Torah on the subject, and they're each getting boiled down to maybe a half hour, so a lot of the nuance will disappear, and any errors are attributable to me, but I will try my best to do justice to their various approaches. So let us start with Rav H. Shalom's approach. And to begin this, we need to understand some of the characters who are involved in the story. So let's start with the character of Achashverosh. A lot of us sort of are under the impression, I certainly was, that Achashverosh is basically a grown-up frat boy. I always sort of envisioned him as the guy, he's the life of the party, as sort of like, this large man with like a big beard and a mug of ale in each hand and a serving wench on each arm who's, in the middle of the giant meat hall singing a crazy song and dancing a crazy dance. And that was sort of my mind's eyes pictures of Achashverosh. I don't know if other people have sort of similar ideas and impressions of him. But Rav H. Shalom says, take that and toss it in the garbage, right? That is not an accurate depiction of Achashverosh. First of all, as we talked about last week, nobody, including Achashverosh, but nobody in the Megillah ever gets drunk. Right? The most we have is Ketov Lev HaMelech Bayayin, right? The king is in a good mood. Incidentally, it's worth noting, right, when the Gemara on Megillah talks about the requirement to drink on Purim, it doesn't say there's a requirement to get drunk on Purim, right? There's a perfectly good word, Lehishtaker, which means to get drunk. And the Gemara says, Chayav Inish Besume. Well, what does Besume mean? The word Besume means a few other times in Shas, and it always means to be in a good mood, something sweet, something enjoyable. It's basically the equivalent of Tov Lev HaMelech.
According to you, would he be able to drive?
That, I don't know whether it's technically a 0.8, and of course if it's a commercial vehicle it would be a 0.04, so I know that's a very low standard. You'd be surprised.
Okay.
He had to be, even though you're saying he's not drunk.
Right, you can make an argument that his judgment is somewhat impaired. You can certainly make that argument.
What is the lo yada?
So that's a different SHIUR, which we're not going to get into now. If you would like, I'd be happy to talk about that subject. And of course,
who doesn't know what's happening if he's not drunk?
Again, there's many different opinions on that subject. We can deal with that. We can deal with that at a later time on the halacha components or the analysis. So point one is Achashverosh should not be regarded in that light. Second of all, in terms of the idea of the king being in the middle of this crowded party with throngs of adoring fans, that also doesn't happen. Why? Because, right, imagine you're just an ordinary Joe in Shushan, right? You work 9 to 5, and one day you get invited to the king's party, right? The entire city of Shushan gets invited. If you went to this party, you would see many amazing sights. You would see vessels of gold and silver and tapestries of purple and blue. One sight you definitely would not see would be...
women.
Well, okay, the king. You would also not see the king, right? Why? Who gets to see the king?
These guys.
Well, very few people, right? There are very few people. There are certain very high-level officials who are allowed to see him. What is their title? Shivata Sarisim, Harmisharatim, et Pnei HaMelech. They are the servants who administer to the face of the king. If you have the title, and they are called Rishonah B'Malchut, right? The most important people in the kingdom. These people are allowed to see the face of the king. In terms of servants, right? There's servants all over the place. But very few servants are allowed to see the king. What are they called? Right, the servants are called the Mishartei Pnei HaMelech, they are called Mishartei Pnei HaMelech. They're the ones who serve the king, and the ones who are the high government officials are called Ro'ei Pnei HaMelech, the ones who are allowed to see the face of the king. If you were not a high-ranking official or an important servant, you were not allowed to see the face of the king. Why would this be the case? Why wouldn't you be allowed to see the king? So there's two reasons, one of which we'll be talking about next week, but one of which is, let's say today, right? You can go on a tour of the White House if you want. You're probably not going to see the president. Why not? Security, right? Serious security issues. Why would we suspect that Achashverosh has some serious security issues, right? He's very concerned. Sorry?
He conquered them, no?
Okay, so one he's a conqueror. We have Big Time Materesh who are, you're not paranoid if they are out to get you, right? Big Time Materesh, we know there's at least one assassination attempt. But what else? Is an interesting point, right? It's a subtle point, but Achashverosh has this big party. When is his big party?
3 years after.
3 years into his reign. Why would he have a party 3 years into his reign? Well, first of all, by way of precedent, what other king in Tanakh has a big party 3 years into his reign? King Shlomo. Shlomo has a big party 3 years into his reign. Why isn't it in the first year of his reign?
Building the temple?
Establishing
what's he doing in the first year of his reign?
He's establishing.
And the second year, right? It's very controversial that he would be the king, right? There's challengers to the throne. He's got a lot of problems. The third year of his reign is when he's safe enough to having an inauguration. What is a pretty strong indication? This is happening with Achashverosh also. Who are the invited guests, right? The people of Shushan is just the last week. The party lasts 6 months. Right, the other 6 months, or five months and 3 weeks, who's invited to the party? Two kinds of people: the governors of the foreign nations or the foreign states, and soldiers. Right? Again, very strong indication. What is this about? He's trying to thank them or curry favor with them, just like when he invites the people of Shushan, he's attempting to curry favor with them. So we see Achashverosh. He's a person who is understandably skeptical and cautious about his own personal security. One final point about Achashverosh. How does Achashverosh deal with mistakes? How many mistakes does Achashverosh make?
That we know of?
Okay. That he would admit to. Let's put it that way.
Well, first of all, is Vashti.
Would Achashverosh admit that was a mistake?
No.
Right? What does it say by Achashverosh? Achashverosh is angry. He has this decree about Vashti. Everything calms down. Achashverosh remembers and he regrets what happened. What does it say? It says he remembers Vashti and what was decreed against her. Right? It's classic, like it's the difference between... Exactly. It's like it's the difference between a third grader and a ninth grader, right? A third grader says, I didn't do my homework. The ninth grader says, oh, my homework didn't get done. Right? You leave some wiggle room there, right? Achashverosh never, ever admits that he ever made a mistake. And Achashverosh, anytime there's a decree that Achashverosh makes, right? What happens with the decree can never be countermanded? Never, right? Which is why, by the way, you'll notice he's constantly consulting with advisors, he's consulting with the law. If you're in a position when you say something, it's never ever going to get rescinded, you probably want to have a bit of advice first. There's 3 major decisions in the Megillah where Achashverosh doesn't consult anybody, right? And he makes them sort of rashly, and it's interesting how those 3 build into a nice pyramid, and we'll be talking about that a little bit later. So that's our character of Achashverosh. But as you would imagine, right, the situation Achashverosh is in is one wherein he's very paranoid about meeting people, and as a result, only people with very high security clearance can come and see him, which means he's basically running an entire empire, but he's getting reports from a very small handful of people.
Isn't that the normal thing?
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. Even if, right, for example, right,
the president... How many people see the president here?
So, right, so the president of the United States, right, when he needs, right, if he needs, a military update, or if he needs, right, so there'll be a specialist from that particular area of the world, and,
I mean, that's the normal thing that they do.
But on any given year, the number of people who'll see the president of the United States, right, hundreds, thousands, right, how many people see Achashverosh? 7. right? He's got the 7 servants who are Mishartei Pnei HaMelech. He's got these seven high-ranking officials. So he gets official reports from 7 people and unofficial reports, probably about the palace, etc., from 7 people. That's it.
We're assuming that the heads of his provinces don't get to see him?
Presumably not. They're not called Ro'ei Pnei HaMelech, and they're not called Mishartei Pnei HaMelech. Right?
Doesn't sound like good politics.
What does it create? It creates a serious informational bottleneck, right? It creates an informational bottleneck where the king doesn't know really what's going on in Shushan, and the people in Shushan don't really understand what's going on in the palace, right? Think for a moment, right, just sort of from a meta standpoint, think about the story of Purim from the perspective of an average Joe. You know, every once in a while the Megillah will toss in, and the city of Shushan was confused, and the city of Shushan was happy, right? Think of you're an average Joe sitting in Shushan. What happens? You're hanging out, eating your lunch, everything's going normal, and then all of a sudden, one day, there's an edict, right? A royal edict with the trumpets and the runners and the whole bit. And it says, the king hates the Jews. Kill all the Jews, right? 11 months from now, we are going to kill all the Jews. They're horrible people. Okay, right? That totally came out of the blue. Right? There's no indication that the king hated the Jews. There's nothing that there was any problem with the Jews before. But kill all the Jews. And remember, right, very important, this decree, does it have Haman's name on it anywhere? No, who signs the decree?
King.
The king. It's got the royal seal of the king. No one knows Haman's behind it.
Does it say the Jews in it? Or does
it says, yes. It says to kill the Jews, right? Haman doesn't tell the king that, but the decree says to kill the Jews.
What was the population of the Jewish people?
How many?
Shushan, in Bavel, Midian?
In Bavel, it's a huge number. Huge number. Hundreds of
He
thousands.
was very unpopular at this point with the Jewish people because he stopped the building of the Beit HaMikdash.
Okay, so that we don't have that in the Megillah. That we don't have in the Megillah. Right?
It's just
We're just all we got is what we got in the text. All we got is what we got in the text. That's our plan. We're going to do a class on Midrashim later if we can. But for now.
Okay, so in other words, you know.
Right, exactly. The Megillah doesn't tell us that, so right. So the Megillah, even in Sefer Ezra, where it talks about King Ahasuerus, it doesn't say that he stopped the building. It just says there was a great calumny against the Jews, and doesn't go into any more detail. So what happens? Right? Everybody hates the Jews. Jews are terrible people. In 11 months, we're going to kill all of them. What happens a few days after that? You're sitting there, eating your lunch, same construction site, and all of a sudden, right? There's a horse that comes by. It's the king's horse. And leading that horse is the king's prime minister, right? Everybody knows the king's prime minister. He's the guy you got to bow down to if you're by the gate, right? And on this horse, wearing the king's clothes, is Mordechai the Jew. And the king's prime minister is going around saying, we love Mordechai the Jew! Mordechai the Jew is an awesome guy! In 11 and a half months, we're going to have to kill him and his entire family and everyone he knows. But he's a great guy. And then what happens a few days after that? Another edict comes with the runner, with the royal thing, and a royal decree. Behold, the king loves the Jews. The Jews are strongly encouraged to defend themselves from all the horrible... What's going on? It's really weird. Like, if you lived in Shushan, you'd be extremely confused by what's going on. Right? It's because of this informational bottleneck. So the king doesn't know a lot of what's going on in the real world. We have 2 characters who use that to their advantage. 2 characters who have contacts on the outside and the inside of the palace. Who are these 2 characters? Mordechai and Haman, right? Mordechai and Haman. So let's start with Haman, right? So Haman, right, we know that he is an excellent manipulator. He's a master manipulator, right? Not only because of what the text tells us, how he's able to turn things, which we'll get to in a moment, but even from a straight-up standpoint, we're told a very unnecessary detail in the beginning of the Megillah, right? We're told the king consulted with his 7 chief advisors, and then we're told the names of the 7 chief advisors, and they never appear ever again. So why do we need to know their names if they never appear ever again? Well, then we're told, right, after the whole Big Time and Terror story, that the king promotes Haman ben Hamdata. Who's Haman ben Hamdata? We have no idea. Meaning, right, in the 3rd year of his reign, Haman ben Hamdata is not Ro'ei Pnei HaMelech. He's not an important person. He's not an important official. His father also doesn't appear anywhere, doesn't seem to be an important official. And yet, by year 7 or year 8, whatever, by Hiachar Devar HaMelech means, he's the prime minister. He's running the show.
I thought we'd say he's Mehuman or whatever.
So again, from midrashically, yeah, there's a lot of reasons to say, right, Memuchan, Haman benefits the most from Memuchan's advice. Absolutely. On a midrashic level, there's a lot of great connections there. But on a level of Pshat, and what the text tells us, we got nothing. Right? Haman seems to have made himself out of whole cloth. Right? Who